Chinese President Xi Jinping has arrived in Saudi Arabia. He's there for 3 days of meetings with regional leaders focused on energy. The overseas trip is Xi's third since the coronavirus pandemic began in 2020 and his first to Saudi Arabia, the world's biggest crude oil exporter since 2016. And China is the world's largest consumer of crude oil. And for more on this, I'm joined on set by our international affairs editor, Philip Turle. So, Philip, since President Xi arrived, the Saudi energy minister has been speaking. What has he been saying?
Yeah, his name is Abdulaziz bin Salman. He's been talking to the state news agency in Saudi Arabia about that relationship between those two countries. He says that Saudi Arabia will remain a trusted and reliable partner for China on energy matters. You have to remember, this is a way of Saudi Arabia seeking new alliances with other countries outside of the United States. It sees that the international geopolitical situation is in a flux situation at the moment. It's not settled, so therefore it sees this as an ideal time to strike up new relationships with other countries or improve their relationships with other countries outside of the Gulf, and China being the one that it wants to improve that relationship the most with. He also says that the cooperation has helped stability in the oil markets over the past year. Both countries will seek to boost cooperation in energy supply chains by establishing a regional center in Saudi Arabia for Chinese factories. And one other interesting point that the energy minister said was that Saudi Arabia's oil revenues in 2022 had gone up by 50%. That, of course, I think in great part due to the crisis caused by the war in Ukraine, to 213 billion euros. So that's what's going on in Riyadh at the moment. The Chinese president there, Xi Jinping, is part of the first China Gulf Cooperation Council Summit, which is taking place in Riyadh. And going back to one of the points that you mentioned earlier on in your introduction about the importance of China for Saudi Arabia, it is the biggest importer of Saudi Arabian oil. At 17% of all oil being imported into China comes from Saudi Arabia.
How do U.S. relations play into all of this?
Well, it's been pretty tense between Saudi Arabia and the U.S. The U.S. sees Saudi Arabia as their key ally in the Gulf, principally because both countries are against what is going on in Iran. They see Saudi Arabia, the United States, as a way of protecting the West against Iran. But there's been a difficult situation over the past few months after Saudi Arabia decided to lower the number of barrels of oil being produced every day by 2 million barrels as part of the OPEC oil-producing cartel. That has seriously annoyed the United States, which said, look, we're right in the middle of a crisis caused by the war in Ukraine. We need that oil to be pumped out even more to stop prices from rising on the international market, to help people keep their fuel bills down. This is also, I think, almost seen by the United States as Saudi Arabia playing into the hands of Vladimir Putin and the Russians by saying they were going to cut oil production at a time when the US said they should have risen that oil production. But I think there's also another point which is a sore point between the United States and Saudi Arabia, and that is over the sale of weapons. I think Saudi Arabia would like the US to sell them more arms. That's not really on the cards at the moment, and I think Saudi Arabia sees China as a country because of the fact that it wants to keep an eye on human rights and how it's perceived in Europe, and they're more willing to sell arms to the Saudis than the United States are. So that's why they want to strike up this rather intense and more productive relationship with the Chinese.
Okay, International Affairs Editor Philip Turle. Philip, thanks as always.